Apparently, all battery packs are safe as long as you keep them charged.
Well, actually,
This topic is different from every other episode I have made because it happened to me. What you are about to hear is not a case study or a hypothetical. My wife and I were sitting in our own home on an ordinary Friday evening when our battery pack caught fire. We got out with our lives, and I want you to understand that we were extremely lucky that we did. We were not the only people this happened to with this specific product, and several other families went through the same thing before we did. Some of them were not in a position to react as quickly. Some of them came far closer to losing everything than we did. The reason I'm making this episode is because most people have no idea what is actually happening inside the devices they use and charge and leave on the floor of their home every single day. I did not. And that gap in knowledge on a different night with a slightly different set of circumstances could have cost us our lives. Think about how many lithium-ion batteries are in your life right now. Your phone, your laptop, your wireless headphones, your electric toothbrush, your power tools in the garage, the game controllers on your coffee table. The smoke detector on your ceiling likely has a lithium battery as its backup. If you drive an electric vehicle or a hybrid, there's a battery pack in your car large enough to power a house for an entire day. We have built our entire modern existence on the assumption that rechargeable batteries work, and we have stopped thinking about what they actually are. We carry them in our pockets. We charge them on our nightstands while we sleep. We leave them on our living room floors. And almost nobody thinks about what is inside them because we have never had any reason to. They just work until the one time that they do not. So let us start with what is actually inside one of these batteries, because understanding the science is the only way to understand what happened in our home that night. A lithium-ion battery stores and releases energy by moving charged particles called lithium ions between two electrodes. On one side is the anode made of graphite, a layered carbon material. On the other side is the cathode made of a compound of lithium and a metal oxide. Between the two electrodes is a very thin porous membrane called the separator, and surrounding everything inside the casing is a liquid chemical called the electrolyte, which allows the ions to travel between the two sides. The separator is the most critical component. It has microscopic holes that are large enough for lithium ions to pass through, but it physically prevents the two electrodes from ever making direct contact with each other. If those electrodes touch, you have a short circuit. That is where the story goes. Here's how the battery actually works when you use a device. When the battery is discharging and powering something, the lithium ions in the anode want to travel to the cathode. They move through the electrolyte, pass through the tiny holes in the separator, and arrive at the cathode. But the electrons that belong to those lithium atoms cannot take that path. The separator physically stops them. So the electrons are forced to go the long way around. They leave the anode, travel through the wire, through the circuit board, through whatever device you're powering, and then reconnect with the lithium ions waiting at the cathode on the far side. That flow of electrons through the external circuit is exactly what electrical current is. Your device is literally the only path the electrons are permitted to take. Think of the separator as the security checkpoint at an airport. The lithium ions have the right credentials and pass straight through. The electrons do not. They have to take a completely different route to reach the other side. And that route goes directly through the machine you're trying to run. When the battery charges, everything reverses. Your charger forces electrons backward through the external circuit toward the anode. At the same time, lithium ions travel back through the electrolyte and the separator, returning to the graphite anode, where they embed themselves between the layers of the carbon structure. This is called intercalation. Picture those lithium ions as passengers who have passed through security and are now lining up at the departure gate. Each one finds an available slot between the graphite layers and settles in. The fuller the battery gets, the more passengers have boarded. At 100% charge, every available seat is taken. The gate is full. At 0%, the gate is empty, and there's almost no one left to board. This matters enormously when something goes wrong. A battery at 100% charge is carrying its maximum stored energy. The cathode, having given up all of its lithium ions to the anode, is now in a chemically reactive and unstable state. If thermal runaway begins in a fully charged cell, every single one of those boarded passengers becomes part of the reaction. The energy released can reach the maximum the battery is physically capable of producing. A battery near 0% has very little stored energy remaining. That does not make an empty battery automatically safe, because a manufacturing defect or physical damage can trigger failure at any charge level. But the fuller the battery, the faster the failure will be, and the more violent the outcome. The Egretech Plume 300W battery pack that was on our living room floor that evening was in active use. It was not empty. Beyond the immediate risk of failure, there is a slower and often ignored danger in keeping a battery at 100% charge for extended periods of time. When a cell sits at maximum charge, the cathode is in its most reactive and least stable state. Over time, that sustained stress causes the cathode material to oxidize and degrade, gradually compromising the structural integrity of the electrode. Most manufacturers, if you read their guidance carefully, recommend storing battery packs at between 50 and 80% charge for long-term storage, not at full capacity. The reason is that a fully charged lithium cell is under continuous chemical stress, and the longer it remains in that state, the more the internal structure of the battery shifts toward conditions that make failure more likely. Charging your devices and battery packs to 100% every night and leaving them there until morning is one of the most common ways people unknowingly accelerate a battery's degradation. It is not immediately dangerous in the way that thermal runaway is, but it is wearing down the safe operating life of the cells every single day. Heat is the other factor most people underestimate. When a battery gets warm during use or charging, it is easy to treat it as a minor inconvenience, something to manage by setting the device on a cool surface for a few minutes. But heat does not just slow a device down. It accelerates every degradation process happening inside the cell. The rate of the chemical reactions that break down the separator, oxidize the cathode, and degrade the electrolyte roughly doubles for every 10 degrees Celsius of temperature increase. A battery pack that consistently runs warm over hundreds of charge cycles is aging at twice the rate of the same battery kept cool. Leaving a device in a hot car and then immediately plugging it in to charge is one of the worst combinations you can put a lithium battery through, because you are adding the heat of charging on top of a cell that is already thermally stressed. The most dangerous combination of all is high temperature together with high charge state, because the cathode is under maximum stress from both directions simultaneously. If a battery pack ever feels genuinely hot during normal use, not warm, but hot, that is not normal. Stop using it. Let it cool completely and inspect it carefully before trusting it again. Now, let me tell you what actually happened. We are going to call my wife Jane and call me John, and we are going to say that this happened in the most personal of places, which is our home. Jane and I were in the living room on a Friday night playing a new video game together. A survival horror game, which is relevant to what happened next. My laptop was on the floor on a cooling mat, and the cooling mat was plugged into the Egretech battery pack sitting nearby on the living room floor. The battery pack was not plugged into the wall. It was running entirely on its own stored charge. I went upstairs to brush my teeth, and Jane stayed in the game. She heard a hissing sound. Because it was a survival horror game and unusual sounds were expected, her brain initially filed it away as part of the audio. She looked around inside the game trying to find the source. The sound kept getting louder, and then she looked down and saw a glow coming from deep inside the battery pack casing. Not a status light, not a reflection from the screen. A glow from somewhere inside the device that her brain immediately registered as wrong. Her instinct in that moment, without any training or prior experience, was to grab the battery pack by its handle and move it away from the electronics and away from the couch. She pulled it to the center of the room. That decision is why we are both alive to tell this story, and I will come back to exactly why in a moment. I was upstairs when I heard her screaming. I came down those stairs as fast as I could move, and what I saw when I got to the bottom is something I will not forget. The battery pack was not simply burning. Individual battery cells were exploding and being ejected from the device in real time, flying across the living room and hitting the television set. The laptop was right there. The flames coming from the pack were greater than 5 feet in height, and they were coming out with the kind of force that a blowtorch produces, not an open flame sitting in place. Directed, pressurized fire driven by gas escaping at high pressure from the venting cells. Here's why it looked and behaved like a blowtorch. When lithium battery cells reach thermal runaway temperatures, the electrolyte inside them vaporizes and builds enormous pressure inside the sealed casing. That pressure has to go somewhere. When the casing fails, flammable gas is expelled at high velocity. If it ignites at the point of exit, which it will, you have a pressurized stream of burning gas. That is a blowtorch, not a metaphor. The physics are the same. The gas is coming out fast. It is burning at the point of exit, and it is directed by the shape of the opening it is escaping through. In our case, cells were being expelled bodily from the pack as the internal pressure overcame the structural integrity of the casing, which is why individual batteries were flying across the room. In that moment, I did not immediately know what I was looking at. My first instinct was to get water, which would have been catastrophically wrong. Once I understood this was an electrical source, I stopped and made a different decision. I ran to the circuit breaker panel to kill the power to the house, thinking that isolating the electricity would isolate the fire. What I did not yet understand was that the Egretech pack was not plugged into the wall. It was a self-contained power source. Cutting the breaker changed nothing, because the battery pack was its own grid. We were dealing with something that carried its own power supply and could not be switched off from anywhere in our house. That is a different problem from an electrical fire. That is a closed system on fire, and it does not care what you do to the building around it. We had 2 fire extinguishers in our home. We could only find one in the chaos, and it was almost completely depleted. Jane used it on the fire, and it suppressed the visible flames for what felt like a fraction of a second. Then the fire came back stronger than before. More smoke, more force, more heat. The extinguisher had done what it could, which was almost nothing against what was still happening inside the cells. Our phones were on the couch on the other side of the fire. I could not get to them. Jane was brave enough to climb over the back of the couch to reach them. She called 911 and described what was happening while I made a different call. Our garage. We had a motorcycle and vehicles in the garage and accelerants stored nearby. And if that fire reached the garage, what was a living room fire would become something far beyond what anyone could manage. I moved the motorcycle and the vehicles across the street and got the accelerants away from the property as fast as I could. As Jane was on the call with 911, we were told the fire department was approximately 10 minutes away. We heard the trucks before we saw them, and the fire department arrived and took over, and they are the ones who brought the fire under control. 17 units responded to our address that evening. The official fire marshal record ends with 4 words: fire extinguished by homeowner. That is how close the margin was. Now I want to go back to Jane's instinct, because this is the part that I believe made the actual difference between us having a home to return to and not. When she saw the glow and grabbed the battery pack and pulled it to the center of the room, she moved it away from the drapes. Our drapes were within reach of where that battery pack was sitting. If she had not moved it, if she had run to get me or called out and waited another 10 or 15 seconds, the fire that eventually reached 5-foot flames with explosive force would have been right against those drapes. Drapes catch. They spread fire upward to the ceiling instantly. A living room fire that reaches the ceiling is no longer a living room fire. It is a structure fire with no ceiling to contain it, moving from room to room, and the outcome of that evening is completely different. She did not know that. She acted on instinct in about 3 seconds, and that instinct was right. This was my wife's yoga mat, and the flame cut it clean in half, effortlessly, like a blowtorch. This little corner is the most peaceful place in our home. It is where she does her yoga, and it became the most violent thing I have ever seen. And here is what still gets me. The cooling mat my laptop was sitting on was drawing only a few watts of power, less than it takes to charge your phone. The pack was barely being asked to do anything, and it still became a torch, reaching around 1,000 degrees Celsius, nearly 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything you just saw is real. That was our living room. That was our home. We trusted this battery pack completely. We took it with us on our camping trips. My wife even carried it into the hospital to sit at the bedside of her sick mother. Think about that for a second. If it had done in there what it did in our living room, surrounded by oxygen tanks, we would not be talking about one burned rug. We would be talking about a catastrophe. We trusted the manufacturer to make sure this thing was tested and safe. We trusted this device with our lives, and that was the single biggest mistake we could have ever made. Every one of those little metal cylinders was its own separate fire, packed by the dozen into one small box we believed in. We got out with our lives. Not everyone does. I need you to understand how fast it happened and how close it was. Now let us talk about what was going into our lungs while all of this was happening, because this is the part of lithium battery fires that almost no one talks about. When a lithium battery undergoes thermal runaway, the gases it releases are not simply smoke. The electrolyte in a lithium-ion battery contains compounds that, when vaporized and burned, produce hydrogen fluoride. Hydrogen fluoride is a colorless gas that you can breathe without initially feeling anything wrong, and it causes chemical burns to the airways, the lungs, and internal tissue. Exposure at low concentrations over a short period can cause symptoms that appear hours later. Carbon monoxide is also released in large quantities. Various other volatile organic compounds and fluorinated gases come off the burning electrolyte. The air in a room where a lithium battery is in full thermal runaway is not just hot and smoky. It is chemically toxic in ways that are not immediately obvious, and the effects can appear long after the visible fire is gone. If you are ever in this situation, getting out of the space is not just about escaping the fire. It is about stopping your exposure to what is in the air. Here's the fundamental problem with trying to fight a lithium battery fire with conventional tools. Each individual cell inside the pack is a self-contained system. It has its own fuel in the form of the electrolyte and the electrode materials. It has its own oxygen supply, because at high temperatures, the cathode breaks down and releases oxygen on its own. It does not need air from the room to continue burning. It carries everything it needs for the reaction inside itself. A fire extinguisher works on conventional fires by removing heat, removing fuel, or removing oxygen from the combustion process. A lithium battery fire laughs at all three of those interventions because the oxygen is not coming from the room. It is being generated from inside the cell. The only way to actually stop what is happening inside a cell that has gone into thermal runaway is to cool it below the reaction threshold, which in practice requires sustained immersion in large volumes of water over an extended period. Some fire departments now submerge battery packs in tanks of water for hours or even days after the visible fire is gone. They are not waiting for the fire to go out. They are waiting for the cells to cool to a temperature at which the chain reaction can no longer sustain itself. So here is what I want you to know before this ever matters to you. If a battery pack of any kind begins hissing, produces a chemical or burning smell, shows any swelling, or produces any glow from inside the casing, do not reach for it and do not try to carry it outside. The time between those first signs and uncontrollable thermal runaway can be seconds, not minutes. Get every person and every pet out of the space immediately and call 911. If you do use a fire extinguisher on a lithium battery fire, understand that you are suppressing visible combustion temporarily, not stopping what is happening inside the cells. Do not believe the fire is finished. Second, water poured directly onto a burning lithium battery from a glass or a bowl will make things worse, not better. The chemical interaction between the electrolyte and water, combined with the explosive conversion of water to steam at the surface temperature of a cell in thermal runaway, spreads the fire rather than containing it. Third, if you want to give yourself a chance to move a battery pack that is hissing or swelling but has not yet ignited, keep a flat shovel and a fire blanket accessible near wherever you store or charge large battery packs. Slide the shovel under the device so you do not have to touch it. Drape the fire blanket over it to contain any early venting, and move it onto a non-flammable surface away from the building. This is not a solution once full thermal runaway has begun. But in the early seconds before the fire erupts, it can mean the difference between getting the device outside and being trapped with it. What Jane did when she saw that glow was the instinctive version of that protocol. She moved the device away from the drapes and the couch to an open floor. She did not do it perfectly, and she was not supposed to. She did it fast, and fast was what mattered. Have a fire extinguisher in your home that is charged and accessible. Know where it is before you need it. Keep battery packs away from soft furnishings, drapes, and anything flammable while they are in use or charging. And if you have any battery pack from a manufacturer you do not recognize, particularly one purchased through an online marketplace without a recognized safety certification from an independent testing organization, treat that device with additional caution. And there is one more warning sign you need to know how to read. If you ever see a battery pack, a phone battery, a laptop battery, or any lithium battery that appears swollen, puffed out, or deformed in any way, treat that as a serious warning and stop using the device immediately. Swelling is caused by gas produced inside the battery during degradation or overcharging. It is the same vaporized electrolyte that drives thermal runaway. In a swollen battery, that gas is accumulating but has not yet found a way out. The cell is already under internal pressure. Do not press on a swollen battery. Do not puncture it. Do not put it in a sealed bag. Do not charge it further. Place it on a non-flammable surface in a ventilated space away from anything flammable. Let it discharge naturally, and then take it to a certified e-waste disposal facility. If a swollen battery is actively getting warmer, or if the swelling is visibly increasing, get every person out of the space immediately and call 911. A swollen battery is a battery that is already in the early stages of the process that ends in fire. The question is only whether anything triggers the final step. And here's the part that should stop you cold. What happened to us was not a freak accident. This power station is still being sold, and Amazon's own summary of its reviews says it plainly. Some customers have reported issues with fire hazards. Fire hazard, in Amazon's own words. One review is titled, "We were all about to die." Her power bank was sitting in her son's room, not connected to anything, when it erupted into a fire 5 feet high, the very same 5-foot flames we lived through. Another watched his explode at 95% charge. 9 seconds. That is all it took, from the first wisp of smoke to open fire. Another caught fire while he was not even using it, and when one man's pack ignited in the early morning while it was switched off, the cells kept exploding, one after another, even after he pulled them apart. Exactly like the science we just walked through. Fire while charging. Fire while doing nothing. Fire on a bed. Fire on a desk. Thousands of dollars in damage. Over and over. From people who never met each other. And never met us. Here's the thing. These battery packs are designed to fail safely. There's a management system inside meant to shut it down. Vents meant to release the pressure. Separators meant to keep it stable. But as you can see, that is not always the case. And when the fire reports pile up, the company does not fix it. They relist the very same product under a brand new link, burying the reviews and starting the rating over from 0. On their own website, they still promise an advanced battery management system for protection, preventing overheating. Tell that to the melted rug. We reached out to the company directly. They denied any responsibility, despite our fire, despite every stranger you just watched described the exact same thing, and then the listing simply vanished. The US product page was quietly taken down. No announcement, no recall, no warning to the people who had already bought one. But make no mistake, it is still being sold right now in other countries. So we tried to seek damages, and not one attorney would take the case, because the maker is overseas, and international law turns it into a dead end. And here's something else worth knowing. We bought 2 of these, because the price on Amazon was a deal that seemed too good to pass up. And that, right there, was the warning we did not see. If something is too good to be true, it usually is. You get what you pay for. So this is what we truly need you to hear. Make sure you carry your own insurance that will cover something like this. Because with these devices, it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. We were the lucky ones. We walked out of our home that night with our lives. We want you to walk away lucky too. Everything you now know about these devices, you know before the moment it matters. And that is every advantage you are going to have. Take it.